The court was in turmoil that morning. A solemn atmosphere reigned in the large courtroom, where every detail recalled the heaviness of justice. The varnished wooden walls, decorated with old engravings by famous jurists, gave an air of timelessness to the place. The imposing chandeliers hanging from the ceiling cast a soft light on the long rows of dark oak benches, where lawyers, litigants, and simple curious people lined up. The quiet hubbub of discussions by lawyers in black robes enlivened the space, punctuated by the sharp sound of heels clicking on marble and the rapid clicking of keys on the clerks' computers. Files were exchanged, hurried murmurs arose, and journalists, always on the lookout for the slightest legal scandal, whispered while casting furtive glances at the protagonists of the case of the day. In a corner, a man in a dark blue suit was reading a document, looking serious. Another, dressed in a magistrate's robe, nervously reviewed his notes, occasionally adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose. The lawyers took their seats slowly, some displaying calculated confidence, others feigning indifference, waiting for the hearing to begin. Then, the main door suddenly opened. Judge Antoine Morel entered. His step was firm, measured, imbued with indisputable authority. Tall, massive, well into his 50s, he wore his magistrate's robe with a pride that bordered on arrogance. His angular face, barred with deep wrinkles, betrayed a man accustomed to imposing his power without challenge. He scanned the room with a stern gaze, his sharp eye seeming to gauge the slightest presence. Morel was not only known for his implacable rigor. He was also known for his intransigence towards young lawyers, particularly those who, according to him, did not have the made required to practice law. In the eyes of this magistrate, justice had to remain a world of traditions, reserved for the heirs of legal knowledge, and not for these new generations whom he considered too idealistic, too arrogant in wanting to shake up an order established for centuries. He took a seat behind his imposing solid wood desk, adjusted his glasses, and briefly consulted his calendar. Mechanically, he tapped his fingers against the armrest of his seat, ready to begin the hearing. It was then that a young black woman entered the room. The contrast was striking. She was small, slender, her face framed by straight hair carefully pulled back. His sober suit, in impeccable black, highlighted a discreet, unadorned elegance. She held a file against her with an ease that showed nothing of her possible stress. But what struck me most was his look. Right. Cold. Mastered. She showed no hesitation, no doubt. However, barely had she crossed the threshold when murmurs ran through the room. Is she a lawyer? Seriously? A man in a grey suit whispered to his neighbor.
An intern, perhaps?
Is this a joke? Replied the other, a mocking smile on his lips. Other faces turned toward her, some curious, others downright skeptical. One of the clerks, a young man with round glasses, stared at her for a moment before looking away, uncomfortable. Judge Morel frowned as he observed him. Something about him immediately ticked off. Too young. Too serene. Too sure of herself. He stared at her for a moment, trying to understand who she was and what she was doing here. Then, with a sarcastic smile, he said in a sharp voice,
Mademoiselle, are you lost?
This court is not a high school, you know. A burst of discreet laughter crossed the room. A few lawyers exchanged knowing glances. One of the journalists wrote down the judge's response in his notebook, already anticipating the tone of his article. But the young woman did not react immediately. She stopped, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and looked at the judge for a moment. His gaze did not blink. She slowly placed her bag on the table in front of her, opened it precisely, took out a thick file, then raised her head. His voice, when it rose, was calm. But there was an underlying authority, a firmness that immediately forced silence.
I am not lost, Mr. Justice. I am Maitre Aissata Diallo, defense lawyer.
An instant silence fell over the room. The judge's smile froze. The whispers stopped. The journalists looked up. A lawyer, leaning nonchalantly against the opposing side's bench, raised an eyebrow. Even the prosecutor, a man in his 50s with graying hair, observed the scene with renewed interest. He too had believed that she was a simple student who had come to attend the hearing.
Morel blinked.
You are the defense lawyer? Indeed, she replied without blinking. I represent my client, Mr. Laurent Fabre, accused of tax fraud. The judge opened his mouth slightly before composing himself, adjusting his glasses in a nervous gesture. He had wanted to humiliate her from the start. He had expected her to stammer, to lose her temper under the weight of the court, the public gaze, her authority. But she didn't blink. A first shiver of annoyance crept into his mind. He resumed his neutral tone, but this time he was no longer laughing. Very well, he said, trying to hide his discomfort.
Let's get started.
As soon as Isota opened her mouth to state her client's defense, the atmosphere in the room changed radically. Leaning slightly forward, her gaze assured, she imposed a captivating presence. His tone was clear, controlled, and each word resonated with unquestionable authority. She spoke with disconcerting eloquence and precision, citing articles of law with natural ease, anticipating every objection from the prosecutor and refuting every accusation with implacable rigor. Each sentence was constructed with unstoppable logic. Each argument reinforced the structure of its demonstration. The words seemed weighed, sharp like blades, cutting away one by one the foundations of the accusation. The prosecutor, a man in his 50s, used to verbal justs and high-profile trials, frowned. He tried to mask his confusion by nervously leafing through his file, but it was obvious that he had just understood that he had a formidable opponent in front of him. Judge Morel, initially skeptical, tried to interrupt him several times. He sat up slightly, trying to regain control. Master Diallo, your reasoning is bold, but you forget one thing. Isota did not let herself be dismantled. Without missing a beat, she turned slightly towards him and locked her eyes with him. With all due respect, Mr. Justice, I am not forgetting anything, she replied calmly, but with cutting firmness. According to Article 132-59 of the Penal Code, alleged tax fraud must be proven by tangible elements and not by simple presumptions. She paused briefly, scanning the room before adding, more slowly, as if to emphasize the obvious. In this case, the prosecution does not have any material evidence directly linking my client to these illicit transactions. A silence fell over the room. Then, almost instantly, admiring murmurs spread among the lawyers present. Some nodded, impressed by the mastery she displayed. Others discreetly took notes, as if a new lesson had just been offered to them. The prosecutor cleared his throat, awkwardly trying to regain his composure. But it was too late. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. Judge Morel felt a shiver run down his spine. He understood that he had made a monumental error in underestimating this young woman. Until this morning, he saw her as just another lawyer, perhaps even an ambitious beginner, but nothing more. Now he realized that in front of him stood an exceptional jurist, a woman who dominated the moment and who, through the sheer power of her words, had reversed the course of the trial. At the end of the hearing, as she was packing up her things with the same methodical precision she had used in her pleading, a journalist approached her. He had witnessed the entire scene, and his eyes shone with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Maître Diallo, how did you manage to become a lawyer so young? Isota gave him a slight smile, imbued with discreet pride. My father was a worker, my mother a nurse. They always taught me that I had to work twice as hard to get respect from others. I skipped several grades and went to law school at 16. I graduated with honors at 21, and today I am here. The journalist frantically scribbled his notes, aware that here was an inspiring story, a trajectory that broke barriers and defied expectations. In a corner of the room, Judge Morel observed him, his gaze lost. He, who had believed himself superior, had just received a lesson in humility that he would never forget. That day, he understood one essential thing. You should never judge someone by their appearance, their age, or their origins. Because in court, only talent, rigor and justice should prevail. And Isota Diallo had just proven it brilliantly.